Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Dead Man Walking Podcast. I'm your host, Repeatedly Dead Fred, author of the medical trauma memoir, The Summer I Died 20 Times, which is what actually happened to me. So it's an appropriate name. Today I am with Kirk Martin, all the way from Wyoming. Hello, Kirk.
Brad, it's good to meet you in person here. Kind of
You
in
too.
person.
Wow,
Yeah.
you're bright. Like you've got some sunshine going on behind you.
It is not my personality, so I try to illuminate myself like a 15th century icon. So,
Mhm. So I am going to throw it to you for your origin story, but I want to establish this is a life experience that you've created a program from, as opposed to many of the guests that are, PhDs or doctors and have those letters. This is your real life experience that you've turned into something really positive.
yeah, I was born the son of a career military father, right, who didn't have a lot of really great tools, as men in that age didn't. And so it was all fear and intimidation, yelling and screaming. So we have a son. He comes out of the womb with boxing gloves on, strong-willed kid, wants to fight. And I was like, I'll double down on this. And so I met that with my anger control issues, screaming and yelling. And he came back 10 times harder. And so I spent like probably the first 7, 8 years of his life trying to change and control him until I finally discovered you can't control other people's behavior, only your own. And when I changed myself, that's when our relationship finally began to change because I could deal with him differently. And so I had this idea. I started volunteering. My son got in trouble a lot in school for good reasons because look, thinking independent people should have trouble in school, right? I always tell parents, like, if you've got a really bright kid, you're going to get calls from preschool like the second day, if not the first. Like, that's pretty normal. And so I started volunteering in his school, try to help. And I was working with all these other strong-willed kids on the spectrum. And I had this idea, and I told my wife, I was like, why don't we invite these kids into our home? So instead of bringing them into a therapeutic office where they just sit there and say, I don't know, and then someone tries to fix something that doesn't need to be fixed, we'll have, we called it Lego camps because all kids love Legos. So, Fred, it was weird. We didn't know what we were doing. I put a $6 ad in a community newspaper that
That's
said
a
Lego
sales
camps.
pitch if I ever heard one.
Oh, we absolutely didn't know what we were doing. I knew I was trying to angle this a little bit better, but people just have to deal with the light beams in my face. So, um, so we didn't. All we knew was we really get these kids, we like these kids, and we don't want their confidence to be crushed. So we got them together. So Fred, this is weird. $6 ad, Lego camps, teach social skills, impulse control, control emotions. And parents started bringing their kids to our home. We lived in a little townhome outside of DC. And I was like, why are you dropping your kids off at our house? I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist. But they were so desperate because these kids don't fit in that well. And they're not always good at sports. So they wanted a positive experience. So we'd have these kids in our home. And when you get kids together, stuff happens. They get angry at each other. We change plans on them at the last moment so they'd melt down. So the idea was, look, therapy is fine, but when you're a kid and you're in a therapist's office, all you say is, I don't know, I don't know. But we had them in situations where we could teach them in the moment impulse control, how to control their emotions, how to get along with other kids. And so it just grew, and people kept bringing their kids to our home. We had a kid from Finland. They flew from Finland to come to our camps, and we took the kids to the pool. And the lifeguard called me over. He said, "Is that one of your kids?" And I was like, "I don't know." The kid was naked, and I was like, "Dude, you're not in freaking Finland. You can't. You have to keep your clothes on here." And so we did that for a decade, and we had about 1,500 kids come through our home. And that was our on the job training, right? Because it was every day this mix of strong willed kids who don't like to listen to adults, who are very volatile. They're really emotional. They don't get along with kids their own age. So you throw them all together, and we're reading the research. but then we're applying it in real life situations. And it grew into something really amazing. People started asking us to come talk, and now we've got a podcast. And we kind of, I ended up quitting my real job. I had a real corporate job back then, and I got fired because I'm probably like you, Fred. I don't always I'm not saying you're not a nice guy, but I don't play well. I'm not a great team player, and I don't like carrying out the vision of a company whose product I don't care about. So I got fired a lot. And the final time I was like, wait, you're going to give me a severance? Good. I can start my new business. We had actually started the business. You'll like this, Fred. I worked at America Online, AOL, and we were having these kids come to camps, but I was still doing my full-time job. Well, I would book a conference room and book a phone consultation with a parent. So I was getting paid to do my side job at America Online, which was awesome. And then I got fired. And so we threw ourselves into this. And now it's about 23 years later. And we've worked with close to 1 million families and spoken to close to 1 million families. So it's cool.
That's pretty amazing. So I think people in the audience might be wondering, parents, what was it for you that flipped the switch to change you? Because that's what parents ideally are going to do, is they're going to have some sort of switch flipped in them to allow them to better interact and understand their kids. So was that like one moment you just had an aha, and the lights shone on your head like they are now? Or
Like it is now. No, it was a series. Look, I was a good dad. Like I was really involved, like took my son out, we did stuff. It was just that I was always irritated by him. It's like, Casey, you have to do it this way. And like it was my own control issues. And I noticed he just wasn't wanting to be with me as much. And I remember, so one of the key moments was I went to my wife and I was like, why doesn't Casey want to be with me? And she looked at me and she said, would you want to be with you? And I was like, hmm. And so that was one moment of like, well, maybe it is me, but I'm a guy, so I live in denial, right? Like a lot of men were like, I don't have, like, this is my favorite, Fred. I don't have anger issues. I'm like,
yeah.
clearly you don't, sir. And so I fought it because, as I look back, I think what it really was, my son brought out things in me that I didn't like about myself, right? Like we were talking before he went on about the people that come out west and live in a van by themselves. It's like people who write mindfulness books who don't have a family. It's like, I'm awesome when I'm by myself. It's when I'm with other humans that I'm not that awesome a person. And so I always joked, I want the mindfulness book written by like an electrician with 3 kids, or like a single mom who's struggling to pay the bills. Like, give me that, not the dude living by himself in a French vineyard. So I think what happened with my son, the hard change was he I was resentful toward him because he was causing me to wrestle with emotional stuff inside of me. And that's hard for me as a guy. Like if you said like, hey, Kirk, tomorrow you don't get to do your work anymore. You've got to go find another job. I'd be like, okay, I can work hard. I can go for it. I can compete and win. But working on hard emotional stuff inside, I don't know about you, but like my dad never had talks about like, hey, son, when your wife is getting upset or has emotional emotions, here's how you deal with it. I didn't have any tools to deal with it. So I was angry at my son because he was causing me to wrestle with stuff inside of me, to deal with my own anger issues, probably my own control issues, my anxiety, and my perfectionism. And I didn't want to deal with that. I just wanted, Casey, do what I freaking tell you to do. And if you just do that, you'll have a good life and we'll have a good home life. And he wasn't up for that. And so it forced me to change, which didn't just lead to this business that we do. It just changed me as a human, right? So I'm thankful today. Our son is 31. We are super close now, partially because we're just alike and we know how to push each other's buttons. So it's, you fight hard and you play hard together, and it's a really cool thing.
Yeah. One of the best life lessons I ever learned was from an old boss who said, who taught me to delegate. But he says the biggest part of delegation is you shouldn't care how they get the work done.
Ooh,
Like you don't want to know how the sausage is made. You just want to see the sausage at the end. If you need a report, you give them the format, say, this is what I need in the report. And if it takes them 80 hours, it takes them 80 hours. But if it takes them 10, who cares? Just let
that
them figure it out themselves.
That's that encapsulates. I was just recording our own podcast this morning, and one of the big tools we use with strong-willed kids is what we would call ownership. So I say, look, here's our objective. Here's what I want done. I just relinquish control to the child over how they get it done, not whether they get it done. So your homework's getting done, you're going to school, you're doing your chores. I just don't care how you do it. Now, do I really care? Yeah, because I have control issues and I'm a freak. And my parent thing is like, if you would just do it the way I told you to do it, it would be so much quicker and better. But the strong-willed kids, they're stove touchers. They want to touch the hot stove. They want to figure it out themselves. So your analogy from your boss, that's what I use with strong-willed kids is, here's my objective. And then I relinquish control over how it gets done. And I try not to watch, because otherwise the whole time you're going to be like, oh, son, let me show you how to do this. Let me show you how to do this. And then they're going to be like, I'm out. They don't want to be told how to do it. Now, it's always within your boundaries, right? So it's not as a parent, it's not like you can do whatever you want. But as long as we're accomplishing the same goal, can I give you kind of a quick fun example I think you'll like?
Sure.
Okay. So morning routine. Most of the kids we work with, they don't want to go to school because school is boring and stupid and they're not really good at school, but they're great at life. So in the morning, typical approach is, well, I want my kids to get up and I get up early and get exercise and eat a good breakfast and look nice and smell nice. What I told our son and our approach is, look, I've got one goal for you in the morning. I want you on that school bus at 7:19 a.m. I don't care what you look like. I don't care what you smell like. I don't care what's in your stomach. If you're smart enough to wear the clothes to bed that you're going to wear to school the next day, you can sleep until 7:17, roll out of bed, grab that Pop-Tart that I knew you hid under your bed. You can run out to the school bus and you don't even have to have your shoes on, because we don't live in Toronto or worse, Winnipeg, where it's actually cold in the winter. And if you want to leave some flip-flops on the bus the night before, I don't care. As long as you're on the school bus at 7:19, fist bump, well done. And you'll find when you let kids do it a different way, they'll be on the school bus at 7:19. It's just ugly watching it, right? Because they're going to be running out the door with clothes hanging off, but they made the school bus. And so that's ownership of the task. And I love that approach. And when we did that with our son, he always did it. We just didn't like the way he got it done.
Mhm. It's entertaining to me watching you and your face because you look so calm and easy to laugh. It's like you should have resting control freak face, but you have exactly the opposite.
Oh, I'm a control freak. I'm intent. Like I can go into the stories like, Casey, you get like I can the look on that look and that tone of voice is very, very natural to me. That's my go-to. And then just over years, I think having all those kids in our home forced me, when you've got 12 kids and they're all oppositional and difficult and making loud noises and annoying, you have to figure out, like, because if you don't figure that out, you murder one of them, and then this story is entirely different, right? Like, so,
So you moved to Wyoming to be able to bury the bodies.
well, I couldn't drag them that far. This was DC, so yeah. No, this is so we eventually transitioned to working with parents, because what I found was, if look, it's not a blame or guilt thing, but if you figure out how the strong-willed kids' brains work, how their heart works, and what motivates them, you can work with them pretty easily. It's the parents where it's all of our own stuff that we bring from our childhood and all my anxiety. Because I'm looking at my, teenage son who's sitting in his bedroom wearing the same hoodie sweatshirt for 18 straight days. And all he does is play video games. And now I'm thinking, who is ever going to marry this child? Who's going to hire this child? Right? How's he ever going to be successful? And now I'm like getting on him all the time. You need to do this. You need to do this. And then the child shuts down. So look, the quickest way to change a child's behavior is just to control yourself. And so I've learned in life, with your wife, with people politically, with people any other way, it's so liberating. I don't have to control anybody else, just myself. And so it just makes it easier in life.
Certainly does. I mentioned my friend with the oppositional disorder child,
Right.
and he just lived to create conflict.
Yeah.
And he would just create lies and tell person A one story and tell person B a different story and the teacher a different story just to get them all arguing with each other. And he would I don't know if you've seen that meme or that gif of Homer Simpson slinking back into the bushes. That's exact. He get all these people riled up, and then he's just, I'm out of here.
You know what, Fred, you're so good at you hit on ownership, intensity. So people are always like, oh, my child's looking for attention. It's not. They're looking for, their brains crave intensity. And so that young man that you knew, and a lot of, especially adopted kids who have been in foster care, especially, they associate intensity with connection. So here's what a kid learns early in life. When I'm playing well, nobody pays attention to me. As soon as I do something wrong, oh, now you've got my full attention, young man. What were you thinking and you can see it on my face. Like you're a little kid or a teenager, all of a sudden mom or dad put their phone down and now I'm staring at you. Fred, what were you thinking and all that intensity feeds their brain. And all they associate it with is, at least I'm important enough to be yelled at. See, because that's the worst thing in marriage, right? Is when you don't care enough to argue anymore, and apathy, right? It's like, I don't even like you enough to argue with you. But at least I care enough about you right now, Fred, to yell at you. And many of our kids, that's where half the sibling issues are simply, I'm bored. And so I'm going to look at my brother, poke him, and then mom's going to come in the room. How many times have I told you not to pick on your brother? If you continue to do that, and then dad hears his wife upset, and men, we barely know what to do with our wives when everything's okay, but when they're upset, we freak out. So dad comes in, yells at the kid, go to your room. And one kid, by looking at his brother, got his brother, his mother, and his father upset. That's what you're talking about. Why would I not do that all day long? If you're going to give me that power over your emotions, then I'm going to manipulate you all day long. That is not the kid's issue. That is the issue of everybody else who reacts to him all the time and feeds it in a negative way. So when what we teach parents how to do is, like when our son would come at me with a glimmer in his eyes, because he kind of had your personality, Fred, you're super bright and you've got this like even the look on your face now is this whimsical little, you're witty, you're looking to do something, say something.
Don't forget handsome.
And handsome, we'll throw that one in. Suave, debonair, all the ones that you and I have always wanted to be, right? And so our son would come into the room with like a glimmer in his eye. And what he knew was, for the first 8-10 years of his life, he could get me to react. And so when I finally said, hey, Case, I know what you're looking for. You want to draw me into an argument because you are an expert attorney. Not going into the courtroom, but I know what you're looking for. You just want some intensity. So here's what we could do right now. I'll give you my intense emotional engagement if we do something positive. But if you want to argue with me, I'm not going there. And that started to shift our relationship. It also, honestly, it was really good for him to learn. My brain needs a lot of intensity. I mean, you've seen, Fred, people like this self-destruct in life because they seek the intensity from the next high. So gambling, drugs, and they're looking for that next dopamine hit, but they never really knew what they were doing. And I wanted my son to know, you need dopamine hits. So he does ski mountaineering out here in the mountains. He climbs mountains. Well, that's a positive way overall to seek that rather than the negative way.
And I think when you have that dopamine rush conditional, I'll call it, you
Yeah.
know, progressively you need to get more and more dopamine to get the equivalent effect. And your body reaches a tolerance where it just can't give you that.
Right.
And that becomes even more problematic. Probably outside the range of what we're supposed to be talking about.
Fred,
Just
we
an
can talk about
observation.
anything. You almost died 20 times. You have the right to talk about literally anything you want.
Okay. So so you have a program now and you go out and speak. Does your wife participate in this as well?
She has private practice and
Okay.
stays super private. She wants nothing to do with any public. So my son actually works with me. So my son and I go out and speak. We don't do as much as we did, prior to COVID.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's a lot of it is live events and podcasting.
So what sort of organizations would think of having you come in?
Schools, a lot of times it's schools will do it because we train teachers. Hey, here's a different way. You've got kids with ADD in your class, which is all of them now. And so every child has a diagnosis almost. Um, and so it's giving them some practical tools. Hey, here's how you stimulate your brain. You don't have to change your whole classroom. So we'll do teacher training in the afternoon and then parent training in the evening. A lot of churches, synagogues will do it for their parents.
There's a synagogue in Wyoming.
Not out here. Not out here. No, in Wyoming, we're pretty yeah, the diversity out here is not that great. So
Yeah, I was duped into teaching at a private school in last August, September, October, and every kid in the class was on some sort of medication, and the spectrum of horrible behavior was just off the charts. And
it's it's go ahead. I'm
I
sorry.
think this was a school of last resort for these parents because they just couldn't find anywhere to put their kids.
It's hard. It's hard being a teacher now. I mean, besides all of that, it's like, how are you going to compete with this? Like, I
Mhm.
get instant dopamine hit, boom, right there in my hands, and now I'm supposed to sit for 45 minutes. Like it's really hard now for teachers. So, yeah, it's just tough. But these
Mhm.
kids, look, these kids are good kids. They're just it's not an excuse for them, but largely misunderstood. And when you were talking where you were going to go with like you need increasing dopamine hits, what hit my brain was purpose, right? Because this is what we basically tell kids. Your job as a kid is good behavior and good grades. And the strong-willed kids are like, I'm 0 for 2 on that, so I'm out. And they just shut down, right? It's like, I'm never going to be that successful in school because I'm not good at sitting still all day listening to people talk about things I'm not interested in. I don't have good short-term memory, so memorizing information for a test. Why would I even play on that playing field? Now, the opposite is they have great strategic thinking skills, which is actually great for the real world. Like a company
Mhm.
pays someone more for strategic thinking than just task completion. And we do our kids such a huge disservice, Fred, because we only like the kids with ADD, they're diagnosed with a disorder that doesn't even make sense. Like they don't really have attention deficit. They have attention deficit when they're asked to pay attention to things that don't matter. But
Mhm.
when they're interested in something, then they have a gift, which is the ability to hyper focus. And again, like that's how all entrepreneurs start companies with hyper focus. I imagine
Mhm.
your brain probably works. You're a hyper focus kind of guy. Like even writing your book, I mean, that takes a tremendous amount of focus.
Mhm.
So, attention deficit, and then you put in hyperactivity. Well, what? Because you can't sit still for 7 hours a day in a
Mhm.
arbitrary environment doing something you never have to do after you're a
Mhm.
kid. And then like, I always joke, I would label the other kids with compliance disorder or energy deficiency disorder. I mean, highly successful people use all the traits that the ADHD kids have. You just get in
Mhm.
trouble for it when you're a kid. And our big
Yeah.
goal is to try to get them to adulthood, knowing how their brains work, mitigate the weaknesses, but accentuate the strengths and walk into adulthood with some confidence, ready to kind of kill it.
Mhm. What I found out as an adult and fairly late is that I needed things modeled for me.
Hmm.
Like, you can't tell me to go do my homework. I don't know how to do homework. I don't know how to research this. Like, somebody needed to show me those rudimentary skills that come naturally to some students, but certainly didn't to me. And even still, today, I find if I can get something modeled for me, I I adopt to it much better.
Now, did you learn how to do the podcasting thing by yourself, or did you have someone come in and kind of set up how it was going to work?
Uh, Pretty much myself. I had a my fasting guru, intermittent fasting guru, Jen Stevens, invited me on her podcast, and then I decided I can do this. So a laptop, set of earbuds. What else do you need?
That's
You
pretty
know,
true.
I don't think like I wasn't going to have a TV experience where I've got 30 engineers and people designing graphics and stuff like that. It was going to be basic, just talk to interesting people, people who have overcome adversity, people who have a unique slant on life. And even if we mess up, who cares? Because the old days, live TV, those mess ups were the best part of the show.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't do any editing, whether it's on like Instagram videos or the podcast. I turn it on, I roll, and I found people appreciate a little bit more. I hate the buzzword like authenticity, but
Mhm.
it doesn't have a lot of like, I don't like, I'm like you. I started with a laptop and those old Apple earbuds that you plug into your laptop.
Mhm.
And we, for whatever reason, became the number one parenting podcast with about $4 of equipment beside the laptop I had. And then my son was like, Dad, you need a real microphone. So we finally got a real microphone. But I think most of it is people just tune into your podcast, tune into ours because it's two guys, you're talking about real life stuff, you can relate to it, and you walk away. Like I learned, like even your story about that boss about, hey, don't show me how you get it done, just go get it done. Like that will stick with me, and I'll probably steal that and use it on my podcast sometime to demonstrate ownership. But yeah, I like the simplicity of just like turn on, start speaking, and you've probably found when you start speaking, stuff comes out of you. And what I plan, like I've got a plan for a podcast that I'm going to do after we're done talking. I know halfway through it's going to take me somewhere else. And all the good stuff is the stuff that I didn't plan.
Mhm. So I've done 3 minutes of research on you before we started talking, and
Thanks,
then
Fred.
probably
Thanks for
another three
caring
more.
so much.
Yeah, I that's just because I want it to be authentic and genuine.
Yeah.
I don't want to have all this biased preconceptions of who you might be.
Yeah. I mean, I should have done more. I read like it's funny. I went on Amazon and like read reviews of your book
Mhm.
because I haven't read your book. Our son I'm going to make my excuse. Our son got married this summer, so we've been busy with that.
Congrats.
But I went, and it's really interesting to actually read reviews of people's perception of what you went through, right? And
Mhm.
how they interpret like how they would have done it. And the reviews are actually really fascinating because it gives you insight into how people think about what you went through. And then it also gave me an idea of like um that you're fun, like people are writing in your book, they were like, he went through the most excruciating, horrible medical trauma, and yet there's humor all throughout it. And so that's why I was excited to talk to you, because I was like, oh, I like a guy who's good and sarcastic and kind of gets human nature.
There's a sequel coming.
What is it?
The Summer I Died 20 Times continued.
Let's continue.
This
Yeah.
is the never-ending story.
Is it going to be called that? Continued?
I think so. I think I've had 5 surgeries since
Wow.
where that book ends.
Wow. I would think like death by a million paper cuts, right? Like it continues to. No, I think you should. I mean, you have it sounds like just you have so much life experience and wisdom to share after being through that. Like, do you mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm actually 63.
Okay, so you're still a kid. I'm 58, so we're in the
Mhm.
same realm. I'm just finding I like getting older because you tend to learn like, well, that doesn't really matter. That didn't really matter. And then you kind of focus on the stuff that really matters. And it's not even that much stuff. Makes life
Very
simple.
true. Yeah, the kids that were cool in high school are so irrelevant now.
Have you been to any of your reunions at all? Do you do that in
Mm.
Canada at all? Okay.
They do. My year hasn't had a reunion that I know of, or else I just wasn't invited. Um, but I see a lot of people. Like one of my kindergarten friends moved from Winnipeg to Toronto. We live like half a block from each other, just totally random. So,
Mm,
and he's connected with a lot of the kids we went to school with. So I live vicariously through his relationships.
yeah. That's awesome. What made you, do you mind me, what made you move? Like Winnipeg to Toronto is a pretty big move.
Um, we're probably going to run out of time before
Okay,
I can
that's
get
fine.
to that story. Um, but basically, I had done my MBA. I had worked at a couple of startups. They ended up being what startups normally are. And I moved here to find better career opportunities and
Right.
better romantic opportunities. And then, of course, I moved here right before 9/11. So,
Oh,
the
wow.
world shut down. So,
Right.
anyhow, uh, had to transition to various other things.
Right.
Stay going. So, as I said, we're almost out of time. So, if people want to get hold of you and get access to your programs and resources, how is the best way to get hold of
I would just look up the Calm Parenting podcast. Our website is celebratecalm.com, which is a dumb name, but but Calm Parent, Fred, originally it was Celebrate ADHD because it's kind of like
you?
in your face, but then we switched Celebrate Calm. But Calm Parenting podcast, you'll find we've got, I think, close to 500 episodes on all different topics. So yeah, there's a lot of content out there. So yeah, and if you email us, we read every email. We really, really try. I've got time now. I'm older. Our son's grown, so I've got time to answer emails, and it keeps me young. So
I think you're doing amazing work and totally
well,
self-taught. So all the better.
it's, Fred, I didn't have any biases going in. It was just observing. I'm really good at observing, partially from my childhood, because my two older brothers got in trouble all the time, and my dad was he was abusive. And so I got really good at observing when my dad was getting upset so I could hide, so I didn't get hit. And so now I became really good at observing these kids and noticing patterns. So the most common comment we get is, "Oh, you just described my child." And so we kind of get these kids, and I really like these kids. And parents just need a little bit of help. So yeah,
They do.
love what I get to do.
Well, Kirk, thank you so much for coming on. And to the audience, thank you for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, tell your friends, get the word out there. Look up Kirk's website and get in touch with him.
Hey, thanks, Fred.
You're very welcome. We'll see you next week.
Okay, bye-bye.